With Fire Emblem Engage literally releasing later this month, I am high on all the Engage news. So rather than covering said recent news, I thought it'd be fun to take a look throughout the series to try and pinpoint what characters are most likely to appear in the game as DLC emblems. Ever since the Game Awards trailer revealed that we would indeed be receiving additional emblem characters through a Day 1 DLC pass, there's been more competition than ever to determine who exactly might just make it in. So without prolonging this intro any longer, let's just jump right into it. In order to predict what characters will appear, I'll be taking a look at the characters of each previous Fire Emblem game to determine who I think is most likely to appear. I'll be determining the majority of this list based on either story relevance or popularity, with a little bit of my own personal judgment put into it. Keep in mind that these are only my predictions. I'm not saying these characters are guaranteed at all, and my predictions are just as valid as anyone else's on who can make it in. So, to actually start... Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon and Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem. As we already know, Tiki is representing these titles for the DLC, so it's a little bit harder to determine what characters could fill this slot, as not only is Tiki the most popular pick, but she's also the one that makes the most sense, due to said immense popularity. Regardless, if we do end up with another Archanea rep, which I already think is highly unlikely, I'd expect it to either be Seda, Minerva, or Hardin. Because Archanea characters have little to no development outside of heroes, being popular is just as key for this hypothetical third rep as it was for Tiki. And judging by how Seda is one of the few Archanea characters with multiple ults and heroes, one of which being a legendary ult, I'd assume she's quite popular. At least among intelligent system developers, if nothing else. Seda also boasts a fair amount of story presence by being the Princess of Tellius and Marth's canonical love interest. Hell, she's important enough to appear in Tokyo Mirage sessions of all things as Tsubasa's main Mirage. The same can almost be said for Minerva as well. She has plenty of story relevance as the Princess of Macedon, and she's gotten more than a few ults and heroes as well. She also made an appearance in Fire Emblem Warriors just like Seda did, and given her status as a DLC character in Warriors, IS definitely know that she can be used to make money when they need it. Despite this, I'd still bet my money on Seda, but I do think Minerva has an unlikely chance to make it in. My final Archanea pick is a bit of a weird one. Hardin appears in Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon as a recruitable character, before turning into a major antagonist in its sequel, Fire Emblem Mystery of the Emblem. Being a character with a solid role in the narrative, I don't think it's impossible for Hardin to appear as an emblem. But while Hardin has certainly been given proper treatment by IS in the past, I'd still assume he'd be sidelined in favour of the other two, due to either his status as a villain in his second appearance, or his significant lack of popularity when compared to the other candidates. But at the end of the day, I'd be happy with any of these three characters being chosen as DLC emblems, if we do end up with another Archanea rep, that is. And before I forget, honourable mention to the White Wings. If it wasn't for the Three Houses Lords stealing the 3-in-1 emblem gimmick, I think they too could have had a chance. Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia. Get ready to notice what I call the secondary Lord trend, as the most likely character from Valentia is Ulm. As the other main protagonist of Valentia, it's practically a no-brainer that Ulm will get in. In fact, Celica was most likely chosen as Engage's base Valentia slot because unlike Ulm, she doesn't primarily use a sword and is far more popular than him as well. So, when you have Ulm, who for all intensive purposes is the only viable Valentia rep at the moment, his appearance as an emblem is pretty much a given. I genuinely couldn't see them adding any other character. But I guess if I had to, I'd put a hard maybe on Conrad, since he's a new addition in Echoes and the brother of Celica. But once again, it just has to be Ulm. Fire Emblem, Genealogy of the Holy War. In an almost identical situation to Ulm, Seliph is the most likely candidate for FE4's DLC slot due to his status as the protagonist of Genealogy's second generation. The only way I could see Seliph not appearing as a Genealogy rep is if they limit Genealogy reps to being exclusively from the first generation, with second generation characters representing Thracia instead. This obviously has its problems, like taking a slot from some Thracia characters and being really, really stupid, but hey, they called Leaf the Emblem of Genealogy, so it's not exactly impossible. If they did do this, I could see Deirdre or possibly Quan appearing instead, but as it stands now, I'd expect Seliph, with the slightest chance for Julia, if they don't feel like adding another blue-haired sword-wielding emblem to the roster. Fire Emblem, Thracia 776. Now we're back to some actual discussion, as Thracia has no definitive second Lord character to pick. The characters I'd pick, however, are Nana, for her role as Leaf's main love interest and a somewhat important character in Thracia's narrative, Merida, for her strong popularity in Heroes with her Ascended ult, as well as both Finn and Ivor, also for their roles as semi-important characters in Thracia's narrative. While Finn is an amazing character and would be cool to see, I could just as easily see how his role as another Cavalier unit could be too similar to Sigurd, who is already FE4's rep. Because of this, I'd personally say Finn is out for the count, but it all depends on whether IS sees it as an issue or not, which they well and truly might not. Then there's Merida and Ivor. Because they both suffer from the sword problem that Warriors 1 faced, and since half this list is already comprised of sword users, I'll be voting against them as well. So, just like Seda, I'm predicting that Nana will be the FE5 rep due to her legendary ult in Heroes, which solidifies her as an important character in IS's eyes. Fire Emblem, the Binding Blade. A trend I've been noticing amongst other people's predictions is that Lilina is the most popular pick for the Binding Blade. This is probably because many assume that as she is Hector's daughter, and because of the heavy amount of favour she is given in Heroes, Lilina is the deuterogonist of FE6. But this couldn't be further from the truth, as most of FE6's dialogue is shared between Roy, Merlinus, and the actual deuterogonist, Guinevere. Despite not being playable outside of Heroes and FE6's bonus maps, Guinevere does hold a significant role in the story as Zephyr's sister and the Princess of Bern. She's not more important than Roy, and the story isn't entirely about her, but the plot definitely gives her more than a few moments to shine. If I was making these predictions based solely on the games and no outside material whatsoever, Guinevere would be my first pick. But of course, things have changed. While I did comment on how Lilina isn't as important to FE6 as people assume she was, probably because they haven't played FE6 due to it being unlocalized, Lilina is probably still the strongest pick. Pretty much all outside material produced by IS, whether it's ults in Heroes or Cypher cards, it all treats Lilina as Roy's canon love interest. And, as I said earlier, because of Lilina's status as Hector's daughter, one of FE7's main lords, she's all but guaranteed the slot. So, sorry Guinevere, you should have just had blue hair. Fire Emblem, the Blazing Blade. Eliwood and Hector. There isn't much to say here other than they're the other two main lords of FE7, and they will more than likely take the slot as one of the DLC emblems. The only question is who is more worthy of being the DLC emblem. Unless Hector and Eliwood are some kind of duo emblem like Erica and Ephraim, then only one of them is going to make it in. Eliwood is obviously the true protagonist of the Blazing Blade and the father of another Fire Emblem lord in the form of FE6's Roy, which definitely grants him more story significance than Hector. But Hector, outside of being popular, is one of two Axe Lords in the series, making him incredibly unique in comparison. Personally, I don't care who ends up being the actual DLC emblem, because either will fill the role just fine. Fire Emblem, the Sacred Stones. When it comes to FE8, the ideal pick would have been Ephraim, but since he's been confirmed as the second half to Erica's ring, we're gonna have to be more creative than picking the other lord. So, the list I've come up with this time is Tana, Ines, Lorachel, Joshua, Seth, and Leon. Tana, Ines, Lorachel, and Joshua all fit into the royalty role that so many Fire Emblem lords fit into. Each one of them also fills a role in the story too, but Lorachel definitely has the strongest, with multiple appearances over the course of the game, and her country's sacred stone being the one used to end the main conflict. It's also worth noting that she uses magic and staves, which, when looking at the current Emblem roster, is something that, outside of Celica, Engage is definitely lacking in. I also mentioned that Leon and Seth have a decent chance too. Leon is what I'd consider one of the best written characters in the series and an integral part of Sacred Stones' story. But just like Hardin, his status as an antagonist significantly hinders his chances. After all, we don't even know if they will let any antagonist characters in. There is, however, Seth, who not only has decent story presence, but is also a character in the running for best unit in the franchise. So, his significance from there could lend itself to him getting in, but it stands to reason that Lorachel is the most likely. Fire Emblem, Path of Radiance, and Fire Emblem, Radiant Dawn. As Ike appears in his Radiant Dawn attire for Engage, it's safe to say that the Tellius titles might have a chance of sharing a DLC emblem slot. Unlike other Fire Emblem sequels, Radiant Dawn was clearly conceived during Path of Radiance's development. This is seen through all the shared plot threads, characters, themes, and so on and so forth. So, a shared emblem slot makes a lot of sense here. Because of this, I believe our DLC emblem will be either Alencia, Soph, Mist, or Stefan. Alencia and Soph both fill major roles in their respective titles, with Alencia getting the slight edge on Soph by being important to 2 titles instead of just 1. She's also a really cool character, so Alencia appearing would be a real treat. Mist also has a shot by being Ike's sister, but her lack of story significance compared to her competition sadly puts her on the sidelines. Finally, Stefan, who is here solely because I am biased towards the funny desert man. With all that said, if Tellius does share a slot, then I'd expect only Alencia. But if we're lucky and we do end up with 2 Tellius emblems, then expect Soph to appear as well. Fire Emblem, Awakening. Lord Treatment says that Chrom will appear, but Avatar Treatment says Robin will appear instead. Personally, of the two, I'd bet on Robin, as they have a more unique kit to work with, being primarily a mage, while Chrom is limited to the exact same stuff as his daughter Lucina, who is already in the game. This is pretty much just the Hector versus Ellawood debate, with Hector and Robin having more interesting kits, and Ellawood and Chrom having more story significance. But either will do. And I can't imagine IS picking one without pissing off fans of the other, so there's no real easy choice here. Regardless, I'm all in on the Fell Tactician. Fire Emblem, Fates. Like half of this list, Fates is incredibly easy to pick a character from. Xander and Ryoma fill the role of the eldest royal for their respective families, and are both given personal weapons in the form of the Siegfried and Raijinto. The other royals could also fit in just fine, but the most likely candidate still goes to Azura, who acts as the deuterogonist to Corrin's protagonist in all 3 routes, with Revelations being her most prominent. Pretty much everything would point to Azura, but Xander or Ryoma could also work. A random bonus pick could be Kana, as they represent like the child units, but they'd be way too similar to Corrin, so I'd rather avoid that. Fire Emblem, 3 houses, and Fire Emblem warriors, 3 hopes. Finally, after 15.5 minutes, we've reached the most recent Fire Emblem entries outside of the yet-to-be-released Fire Emblem Engage. Originally, one of the 3 house leaders would have gone here, but as they were the first DLC emblems revealed, we no longer need to argue about which of the lords is best suited for Engage. So, which Fodlan character do I believe will make it in? Well, if they do decide to double dip into Fodlan, the next emblem will be either Yuri, Rhea, or Shez. Yuri is the leader of Garagmok's 4th house, the Ashen Wolves, and he clearly holds greater story significance over many of the other students because of it and his DLC side story. Rhea also makes a lot of sense due to her massive role in Three Houses' story. Unfortunately though, Rhea falls victim to the villain trap, as she isn't playable outside of Three Hopes and is morally questionable to the point that considering her a hero just feels wrong. Lastly, there's Shez, who is just as important as Fodlan's initial emblem, Byleth, because they are yet another Avatar character. At least in Three Hopes, which is technically a spin-off. Yeah, as much as I'd want our funny little mercenary friend, there's always the counter-argument that they're a spin-off character and not from a mainline Fire Emblem game. As such, I'll be placing my money on Yuri, if we're ever to get another emblem from Fodlan. And with that, we're done! Of the predictions I made, I personally want to see Alencia and Seliph make it in the most. But, as always, there's the chance they just screw us over and give us entirely Three Houses and Fates emblems from now on, but here's hoping they don't. Like I said at the start, these are all of my predictions for the possible DLC emblems. So by all means, please let me know what your predictions are down in the comments below. I'm genuinely curious as to what you guys can come up with. As a side note, I'm pretty sure that in my last video I said I'd try to upload more frequently, and unfortunately I failed to do that for 2022. But hey, it's a new year now, so I'm going to try and get at least one video out per month. Which I know sounds bad, but compared to my one video per year schedule of before, it's actually quite good. So if you want to hear me ramble on about more dumb stuff in the future, then consider subscribing. I did have a lot of bigger videos planned, but I just got struck by some awful writer's block, and then I had exams and just all these shenanigans going on in the background. So just remember, I'm gonna be uploading a lot more frequently now, so stick around if you want to see that. As always, thanks for watching.